Imagine waking up tomorrow with a serious fever. You feel weak, you cannot work, you cannot hunt, you cannot even keep up with your group. And there is no hospital, no antibiotics, no thermometer, no emergency room. So what happens next? For ancient humans, sickness was not just a medical problem. It could become a survival problem for everyone around you. But there is a surprising part of this story. Archaeology suggests that at least some ancient humans survived serious injuries and illnesses long enough for their skeletons to show healing. And that creates a fascinating question. Who took care of them? Scientific clarity. The first thing we have to understand is that ancient disease is surprisingly difficult to reconstruct. Soft tissues usually disappear. Many illnesses leave no visible mark on bone. And even when scientists find a strange lesion, it may not reveal exactly what caused it. A recent study of ancient animal remains makes the problem especially clear. Skeletal lesions can indicate long-term infection, but acute infections may leave no visible skeletal trace at all. Even when ancient pathogen DNA is recovered, researchers have to be careful about connecting it directly to a particular disease. So the archaeological record is incomplete. What survives is a tiny, distorted window into ancient health, but that window is getting much better. Ancient DNA can now reveal pathogens that were living inside people thousands of years ago. A large 2025 study analyzed more than 1,300 ancient human individuals across Eurasia and identified thousands of pathogen DNA hits, showing that infectious disease was a persistent part of human history. And some of the evidence is astonishing. Researchers have recovered ancient DNA from pathogens associated with serious diseases, including tuberculosis-related bacteria and tetanus-causing Clostridium lineages. So yes, ancient humans got sick, probably in far more ways than their bones can tell us. But being sick creates another problem. You still need food, you still need water, you still need shelter. And if you are too weak to get those things yourself, somebody else has to help. This is where ancient human social behavior becomes especially interesting. Scientists have proposed that caregiving could have played an important role in human evolution. But there is an important warning. A healed skeleton does not automatically prove that another human cared for that person. Animals can sometimes survive serious injuries without assistance, and care itself rarely fossilizes. Researchers therefore treat survival as evidence consistent with caregiving, not absolute proof of it. Still, some cases are difficult to ignore. Think about a person with a severe physical injury who survives long enough for the body to remodel damaged bone. That person must have had access to food, water, protection, or at least enough time and opportunity to recover. Someone or something in the environment had to make survival possible. And for highly social primates, cooperation is an obvious possibility. Beat. Then we get an even stranger clue. Some ancient humans appear to have experimented with substances that may have affected illness. One famous example comes from the Sidrón Neanderthals in Spain. Researchers studied ancient dental calculus, basically hardened plaque, and found evidence suggesting that one individual had a dental abscess and a gastrointestinal pathogen. The same individual also showed evidence consistent with consuming plants and microorganisms that may have had medicinal properties. The researchers described this as evidence of possible self-medication. That does not mean Neanderthals had pharmacies, and it certainly does not prove they understood antibiotics in the modern sense. But it suggests something fascinating. When an ancient human became ill, the response may not have been passive. They may have observed plants, remembered what happened before, learned from other people, and tried something. Dry humor. Basically, prehistoric medicine may have included a lot of "grandma says this leaf helps, only grandma had to be right" scientific clarity. And humans eventually developed much more sophisticated medical behavior. A remarkable example comes from Borneo. Researchers reported evidence that a person underwent surgical amputation of a lower leg around 31,000 years ago. The individual survived the operation for years afterward, based on the healing evidence. That is extraordinarily early evidence of deliberate surgery. The authors argue that it has important implications for the history of medical and socio-cultural practices. Think about what that requires. Someone had to recognize the injury. Someone had to decide what to do. Someone had to perform an extremely painful procedure. And someone had to keep the injured person alive alive afterward. There is no way to know exactly what they were thinking, but we can see the outcome. The person survived. And this changes the way we imagine prehistoric sickness. We often picture ancient humans as completely helpless against disease. That is probably too simple. They had no modern medicine, but they were not necessarily without medical knowledge. They could observe, they could experiment, they could remember, they could teach, and, most importantly, they could cooperate. Infectious disease may also have changed alongside human lifestyles. Ancient pathogen research suggests that different disease pressures were associated with changing environments, populations, and later interactions with domesticated animals. So becoming sick was never just an individual experience. It could affect an entire group. A sick person might need food brought to them. Someone might need to stay close. Another person might know which plants were useful. Others might keep watch. In other words, social relationships could become part of survival. Warm conclusion. And that may be the most interesting answer to our original question. What happened when ancient humans got sick? Sometimes they probably died. Sometimes the illness left no archaeological trace. Sometimes their bodies show evidence of disease long after the person disappeared. And sometimes, against the odds, they survived. When they did, the clues suggest something remarkable. Human survival was never purely about being the strongest individual. It could also depend on knowledge, memory, cooperation, experimentation, and care. Modern medicine has transformed those abilities with hospitals, drugs, surgery, imaging, and scientific testing. But the underlying idea is surprisingly old. When one human cannot survive alone, another human may help. And that simple behavior may be one of the oldest pieces of medicine we have.